Hello, welcome to CivilNet. I'm Emil Sanamyan. This week I'm working from Yerevan, and today we have Arsen Kharatyan with us. Arsen is working as advisor to Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan. We have an opportunity to ask him a few questions about what are the priorities of Armenia's foreign policy in the last almost 3 months since the change of government. Arsen, I wanted to begin with a big issue, and the big issue has been Karabakh conflict. Earlier, shortly before he was elected as Prime Minister, Nikol Pashinyan addressed a huge crowd at the Republic Square and made a pledge, made a promise to finally come to a point that many Armenians have been aspiring for many years now, to make Nagorno-Karabakh part of the Republic of Armenia. Certainly that's something that's been in the back of the mind of many Armenians, but I don't remember actually any of the Armenian leaders to articulate it as clearly as Nikol Pashinyan did. And I wanted to ask you, how does Armenia get to that point of reunification?
Well, thank you for this opportunity, and it's good to see you here in Yerevan, Emil. There are several big issues on the foreign policy agenda. Obviously, Karabakh is one of the major aspects or areas of any administration, previous administrations in Armenia. We all know the regional architecture, security architecture, Armenia's, but also the larger regional, probably the biggest challenge is the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict at the moment. At least from our perspective, it is of course in the top priority list of Armenia's foreign policy with this administration. I am not going to talk about even a politician, Prime Minister, now Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan statements, or I don't see that as my job to basically reiterate or analyze what the statement was. But shortly after this statement, and then after Pashinyan was voted in as Prime Minister of Armenia, Armenia's foreign policy priorities have been pointed or announced quite clearly. Armenia continues to consider negotiating within the OSCE Minsk Group co-chair format. Armenia is committed to a peaceful process, and Armenia is committed to a continued negotiated deal. Now, one slight change in this, while in the larger scheme of events, Prime Minister announced that there will be no large or major foreign policy changes in Armenia's foreign policy, but the one thing that has been reiterated afterwards is that the Prime Minister has been stating clearly that as he was not born in Nagorno-Karabakh, he has never held any official positions in Nagorno-Karabakh. He himself does not have the capacity or cannot negotiate for Nagorno-Karabakh itself. Now, Nagorno-Karabakh should become a party to the negotiations, and this is a very clear message that has been sent by Prime Minister since he was voted in. As for Armenia, Armenia is a party to the conflict, and obviously one of the biggest players in this. Of course, we are committed to continued negotiations, which as of now, as you know, have not happened yet. You know that the Prime Minister has met with Azerbaijan's president in Moscow once, a very short exchange, and you are well aware of the meeting between the foreign ministers, which took place in Brussels last month in July. From here on, obviously, there should be the ambiguity should somehow come to an end, and there should be an understanding, a clear understanding of what the format and the continuation of the negotiation should be.
Very well. As far as that format, negotiations format, and the general trend, and as far as Armenia communicating with Azerbaijan over the past decades, what we've had sort of non-democratic tendencies in domestic affairs of Armenia and Azerbaijan, but we also had those non-democratic tendencies in that peace process. And by that I mean that only very few people from both sides were involved in a very irregular exchange of information between each other. Would you see a possibility for democratizing that peace process as far as involving more people in between Armenia and Azerbaijan? And I'm not just talking about track 2 efforts, but also in messaging that Armenian government does towards Azerbaijan, whether it could be expanded to with a part of Azerbaijani public that feels left out of this process, both because of domestic situation in Azerbaijan, and also because they don't hear anything from Armenian government or Armenians in general, and their views are formed from what they hear from Azerbaijani government or from Azerbaijani actors in this conflict. Do you see more of an opportunity for this current government to do something different as far as public outreach towards Azerbaijan?
With regards to non-democratic tendencies, just a quick comment. The Prime Minister's speech at Brussels during the NATO summit was, I think, very clear about this, saying that from here on, any attack against Armenia or Karabakh is going to be viewed as an attack against democracy, human rights and peace. And we have a very clear understanding of where Armenia is heading in sense of reform when it comes to continuous democratization of the country, building or strengthening the existing institutions, be it the justice system or any other large institutions that have to deal with democracy and the change on this end. A very good point on possibly democratizing the negotiations process. I think it somehow already happened. If you saw at least there is a first sign of it. So the First Lady, Prime Minister's wife, has announced and talked about a peaceful transition and a need for a peaceful future. So without even, this just came to my, I just remembered that without any formal involvement of anyone, but there are players, this is a new political organism in Armenia, and I think if not an agreed format, where, who, on which level, setting aside the track 2, as you rightly mentioned, which has been going on for years now, and has delivered some results, maybe not very tangible, not very visible, but some kind of dialogue has been continuous between the NGO community, civil societies, between the journalists, between community leaders, bordering community leaders who have been meeting constantly, talking about small issues or big issues, whether it's the line of contact, whether it's the border, what and how, what can be done for actually somewhat, even not very effective, but confidence building measures. So now I don't think if there, I don't know if there is any formal talk about an institutionalized way of expanding the negotiations process, but this could be an interesting idea to entertain and maybe consider basically pointing out maybe other players who could be, if you wish, starting from just message carriers or trying to communicate between each other, and then with why not maybe other formats of negotiations. As of now, we are where we are, as you know. Even before, with the previous administration, the negotiations were in stalemate. Since the April war, no serious talk has taken place. And so this is not, the reason why we are where we are is not just because the transformations and the changes happened in Armenia, but also in the bigger picture, the negotiations were basically frozen or non-existent.
Mm-hmm. Well, let me clarify this point about Anna Akopyan's statement in Moscow. If you could run through that a little bit, what exactly she proposed, how did that idea come about, and what's been the reaction from Azerbaijani side?
I think one of the key things, two things kind of coincided or maybe went after the other. Anna Akopyan, who was in Moscow meeting with cultural leaders, intellectuals in Moscow, was just talking about the importance of peace and finding peaceful resolution. And this was a larger discussion, but I think the message was very clear in that we are interested in finding a peaceful solution. But that doesn't necessarily mean that there was a policy that was going to be suggested. I'm just thinking, as it happened, I'm just bringing in the example that, for example, I haven't heard Azerbaijan's First Lady talk about peace, or maybe correct me if I'm wrong, if that happened before. Now, just to continue it, Prime Minister, while giving an interview to Ekh Moskwy, was talking about the importance of, in a way, which I would view as a confidence building measure, the fact that his son is serving in the military and he is on the line of contact in the military right now, which in and of itself shows that there is no interest to go for war. Now, I think it created a lot of discussion within the Azerbaijani society, as we were all following as well. And I would like to view this as a possible constructive and positive move that could resonate with not just the Azerbaijani public or civil society, but also with the government and with the administration to maybe consider and think about doing something serious, show political commitment on going towards peaceful resolution rather than aggressive rhetoric and aggressive behavior that we have been following in the not only past couple of months but years that we've been following.
And another sort of semi-strange thing happened in the last week where President Aliyev was speaking in a domestic setting, and he made latest derogatory remarks towards Armenia, and then later those remarks were denied by the President's office, and the news agency that carried those remarks was shut down. Do you view that as somehow related to maybe modified rhetoric on the part of the Azerbaijani government, or is this not an evidence of anything?
I think the fact that Armenia and the official Yerevan now in its messaging, but also the transformations that have been taking place and are taking place in Armenia are happening is indirectly impacting others in the region as well, especially that of Azerbaijan and the Azerbaijani administration. I'm sure, and I've said this before, I'm sure there is a lot of not Azerbaijani communities. There are a lot of people in Azerbaijan who, of course, would desire to have a transformation in their own country. I'm not going to go into the details on this, but this is what the Azeris I know would definitely love to have change in their country. But setting that aside, it is probably something that they have to adjust to. This is a new Armenia, this is a new administration with a much stronger messaging on democracy, accountability, and human rights. And whether they like it or not, they have to, everybody else actually is following what's going on in Armenia. And I think it will take a little bit of a while until everybody adjusts to these new realities. And that will probably impact the wording and the rhetoric as well in the future.
Mm-hmm. Let me shift to the broader foreign policy picture. We've had sort of preliminary kind of visits and preliminary meetings happening in Moscow and Sochi before that, in Brussels, and also Washington with the first Deputy Prime Minister. What is your overall sense of this preliminary stage? It seems like there has been sort of hints of dissatisfaction on all three of those main directions, be that Russia, European Union, United States. What is your sense of where Armenia's foreign policy is?
Well, let's not forget about Georgia, which was the first official trip of the Prime Minister, which in and of itself should have been a message in that the neighborhood, our neighboring countries, our partner countries are very important for us, and we want to maintain and develop further the special relationships that we have with the countries neighboring us that are friendly, partnerly, and we have a good tradition of cooperation. In all fronts, as you have rightly mentioned, there is, as much as we are announcing and continue to say that there is no interest in making major foreign policy changes, we're not going to make any U-turns, or so we're not planning to. So the commitments, the international commitments that Armenia has, are going to continue to be there, and we're going to try to build further on this. However, this is a new administration. This is a new group of politicians that have now come to power, and obviously it is going to take a little bit of a while until the body language to the rhetoric will be understood to our foreign partners. And I think this is a normal process. With regards to how the diplomacy is being conducted with this administration, first and foremost, we are trying to understand what has been done before us now from within. It's one thing when you're either in the opposition or you're a journalist or you're an analyst and you can only have so much information. Now we're seeing a lot of the picture that is not necessarily what we knew from outside. So
there's kind of a learning curve. And as far as the learning curve, do you get sufficient amount of information from the institutions, foreign policy institution of Armenia? Say, does Minister Sanamyan now have an opportunity to call former Minister Nalbandian to discuss whatever he wants to discuss? Does that happen regularly? Is there?
I think there is no. I don't think anybody is forbidding anyone else to communicate with anyone who has been in the former government. But that's not. Putting aside personalities, I think what I'm happy about is that in these years that Armenia has had independence, we have developed and thank God have enough institutional capacity on the level of civil service. And so people with institutional memory, that is something that we consider a very important part of it. People who have been serving the state without any political capacities, who know and remember where we have been coming from and where we're going. And in this respect, I think it was a very important decision not to have, let's say, a very big change or quick firing process of whoever has been there in the government just because they have been serving different administrations. So this is, I think, a very successful, so far, model of moving forward in that the philosophy is the following. There is going to be no large firing reform program of government civil service servants. However, everybody has to realize that the realities have changed and the situation within which they're going to operate are different. So if they are going to survive in this situation, we will be happy for everybody's service and are thankful for the service. If they're not, then they'll have to either adjust, or if they're not, they'll have to make their choices.
A couple more questions. Well, of course, I can't go and ignore Minister Lavrov's statement that we all heard. That's something surprising for you, because in his statement he mentions that there were conversations that were happening prior to his statement, that he wasn't apparently satisfied with those conversations and took that decision to make a public statement about his concerns of things happening in Armenia. Was that a surprising statement for you? Was it something you expected? How do you go from that statement to continuing normal partnership or allied relations with Russia?
We are continuing the partnership and thinking, considering, and as we've stated, furthering and deepening our cooperation and making it more effective, be it on the multilateral, bilateral levels. With regards to Minister Lavrov's statements, I will refer to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs statements of Armenia. I don't have a comment on this. I think it's pretty clearly stated. But I think there are different communication channels that are working, and I think wherever we cannot find, or wherever we are, let's say, having a situation which is unusual from before, is also showing the fact that this is a new administration that is adjusting, and well, our Russian partners are adjusting to these new realities too. So I would view this as part of this process. That is a transitional process where the effective communication will be set back on, and I think all, as Prime Minister has stated, there are no issues, there are no black corners in Armenia-Russia relations. Every single issue should be and can be discussed, and we're going to move forward on, again, making the communication and the relationships with our strategic partner further more effective, and hopefully soon enough the results of those will be visible.
One last question. You're a foreign policy advisor, but certainly many of our viewers are members of the Armenian diaspora. I wanted to ask you a question about how this new government is going to interact with the Armenian diaspora. There are some hints that there might be some changes as far as how Armenian government will sort of go to the diaspora, whether in terms of taking things to the diaspora, as far as supporting education in diaspora, supporting cultural programs in diaspora, and also what kind of expectations the Armenian government now has from the diaspora. As far as major institutions that were established previously, like Hayastan Fund, etc. Would you be able to comment on this diaspora policy of the new government?
Well, the diaspora minister is visiting a lot of communities right now, and I think successfully meeting a lot of the key players right now in the US, but not only elsewhere. We were in Georgia together. There is a constant communication with the Middle Eastern diaspora groups. I think the one thing that is definitely going to change is the probably slight transformation in the policy, because, as you know, the political party that is actually in charge in Armenia right now, Civil Contract, has announced repatriation as part of its not foreign policy, but program. So there will be a better understanding of what and how this should be happening. Again, the same issue that exists on other fronts. The new team needs to be known for diaspora players, be it the very known, established institutions, organizations that have a long history of work in different Armenian diaspora communities. You know better than myself that there is no one diaspora. I mean, there are different groups that live. Obviously, there might be one or two agenda points that might unify them, but in general, we are dealing with many different groups in different places. The diasporas in Russia, even within Russia, are different and have different approaches. The United States is the same thing, France, the Middle East, Iran, Georgia, you name it, right? So I think the one thing that is happening now is, first of all, the diaspora groups and ourselves getting to learn and know each other better, to look into what the philosophy of or the policies with regards to diaspora has been under previous administrations, to review or revisit the institutions that have been formed throughout this year since the independence, be it the All Armenia Fund, be it the Pan-Armenian Games, be it the Armenia Diaspora Big Conference, the Diaspora Ministry itself, the informal and formal agencies or organizations and people who have been basically liaisons for many programs. But I think one of the key things that this administration is considering is changing the image of Armenia of absorbing diaspora's resource and thinking about contributing to the outside diaspora communities. This should be, the wording and the messaging should be shaped better. I'm thinking out loud here with you, but I am to a degree involved in the new Armenia diaspora policy or discussions. So soon enough there will be a more comprehensive and more detailed approach on what Armenia is going to view as its relations with different diaspora groups and organizations.
Thank you very much, Arsen. Thank you for being with us. Arsen Kharatyan spoke with us about Armenia's foreign policy priorities. Thank you.